Hi, my name's Tom Scott. Thank you all for being here this morning. Hey, good to see you. I've been inspired over the last few days. You know, this is, to a certain extent, this is a new world for me. I have been teaching for a number of years at Brown University, but my focus has always been entrepreneurship. I've always found it problematic, the fear, you know, that I think some of you can identify with that I have. You know, even within entrepreneurship, there's a lot of interesting things to discuss and certain things I get afraid to discuss. I get afraid to say the wrong thing. Like, that's been kind of my life. I went to Brown, and I don't ever remember. I remember I knew the guy who ran the college Republicans, and I always thought, no, I'm not trying to offend anybody here. I always thought that was kind of dorky, but I didn't think it was, bad. You know, I didn't think he was evil, and I don't think people treated him that way. I think other people treated him as a bit of an outsider, but not as bad. And I definitely went to college wondering, like, is it communism or capitalism that I should prefer? You know, is it Reagan or someone else? You know, Reagan was president. And so I idealized college in a big way. I still do. Like, I still think of it as this beautiful life opportunity, and I think America in particular has done it very well, generally, and it's critical to prosperity and freedom and all those things that even what I just said is unfortunately political today. I think I said relatively straightforward things that are relatively, I think in the nuance, we'd probably share a similar set of beliefs. In fact, I know that's true because I do this a lot, which is to say I have difficult conversations about difficult things and have been doing that for a long time. Nonetheless, I am an outsider. You know, I'm not an academic, but I did just take a job down at the University of North Carolina, which I taught last spring, but this year I'm going to play a role as director of the dialogue initiative down there. And I'll still be the chairman of what's called the Nantucket Project. And the Nantucket Project, I won't spend a lot of time describing it, but among the things we've done over the years and from the very beginning, I have always been frustrated and paid a lot of attention to the launching of the 24-hour news cycle and then the gasoline that got poured on that when social media came about and how many problems that created in culture. And for me, as somebody who I like to have interesting conversations, those interesting conversations diminished. You know all this, but that's my background. And so the founding of the Nantucket Project, which initially had more to do with 24-hour news than social media, because social media really hadn't happened yet, was all about meeting the human beings behind the ideas and allowing us to do the goofy words, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to do those things. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I think the thing we do best, if I can brag about one thing, because I don't think we're smarter than anybody else, and we're certainly not more academic than anybody else, but we definitely take bigger risks than most, and we are courageous in taking those risks, and sometimes they go a little bit sideways. But this would be my science. The bad conversations create the best outcomes. That it's got to go bad before it gets good, and there's something so beautiful in that. And that's the experience that we had at the University of North Carolina this spring, which we'll talk more about. But what I do want to do right now is I want to introduce through film a guy named Simon Greer, who, through the community of people that the Nantucket Project was built on. Primarily, the Nantucket Project initially was a version of what you might think TED is, a 4-day event with ideas, but the point has been throughout dialogue and pluralism. Like, that's what we do. And there's no question it's a little elite-y and a little annoying and all those things that the brand and the place comes with. You can criticize me for that, and there's probably some truth in that. On the other hand, it has always been courageous and authentic and vulnerable in those ways. And we ask people to do things that they normally do not do. Like, there's no question about that. And again, sometimes it doesn't go the way you exactly want it to go. I would argue that's fine, because then we get to observe humanity in an authentic way. But one of the people who came to me was a guy named Simon Greer. And Simon had made a career out of doing this very thing. You know, the nice thing is I always like it when I can't tell a person's politics when I meet them. I always appreciate that. I don't want to know your politics right away. I just want to meet you, you know. And I couldn't tell for him. I now know what his politics are. We can talk about that later if you like. But what I do know is that he was practicing courageously powerful conversations. And I love that. We did a project a number of years ago at Oberlin, following that bakery thing that you may have seen. And it was between Spring Arbor University, which is an evangelical school, and Oberlin. We did 10 students from Oberlin, 10 students from Spring Arbor, 10 days at Spring Arbor, 10 days at Oberlin. Yeah, of course, in the beginning, they thought each other were freaks. And at the end, a woman from Spring Arbor got up and gave a blessing to the 20 kids, and 18 of them were crying. It was beautiful, you know. It's just, and so many, the thresholds they crossed were amazing. So anyway, that's our background. You know, we work with universities a lot, but a lot of our work has been on the road and in different places, doing the hard things. But as I said before, I think the reason they cried at the end is because it was hard in the middle. If it's easy in the middle, they're not going to cry at the end. It's just not that meaningful. So hard isn't bad. Hard is good. Scary isn't bad. Scary is normal. It's going to be scary. Like, it gets scary. Probably gets scary today. Might not. Anyway, I'm going to introduce Simon. Through film, one of the things we do is film. I hope this outlines for you guys a little bit who Simon is in the spirit of what we do. And you'll also get a little bit of sense of what the Nantucket Project is, because a decent amount of this is set at our gathering. So, oh, I'm going to push here. Sorry, I haven't even looked at this yet, and I should have. Just push forward. And then push again, right?
So here's what Simon Greer says. Put the common good first. This leads to death camps. A Jew of all people should know that.
I almost said no to this. The least I can do is sit and listen to somebody who I have hurt. How sure were you that you were going to leave here, assuming that you do, feeling better?
I think this is true in a lot of things. I can't control what you're going to do. I could bring my best self and show you my heart. I want to put this behind me, and maybe there's a way we could do something good. And if I brought that to you with all sincerity and just placed it before you and you said, that's a bunch of shit, all right, well, I could still go home to my kids and say, I did everything in my power to be the best person I can be.
The Simon of the past was the guy who beat up the other guy, like beat up the other guy politically, and he one day realized it was actually having diminishing returns.
I was a foundation executive, I was a progressive leader, I was a somebody. I had power, I had access, but maybe the worst part was that I demonized the other side to win.
Simon is the best bridge builder that I've ever seen. You know, he came to learn to connect with just about anybody.
I'm sorry for where I came up short this year as a progressive. I'm sorry for the forgotten parts of America who have been losing ground and who we haven't paid attention to. And I'm sorry that we've added anger to a far too angry nation. What do you got?
I forgive you.
This is not an academic theory. This is practice. Simon has played the game a million times. He's gotten beaten up. He knows what this is. Nobody takes a punch better than Simon, and taking a punch is part of it.
If it's easy to target me, I've been called a race traitor by white people and a racist by black people enough times that I'm not pleased with it, but I'm not disappearing.
This is the whitest I've been around in probably about 3 or 4 years.
I don't like you the more I sit here.
Damn it, I'm telling you what my life tells me. This is a waste of time.
This will turn into a hot civil war.
We have been in a state of war.
This leads to death camps.
Simon is such a loser.
In this moment of deep divide in the country, if you had the attention of the American people, what would you say?
I would say you share this country with your fellow Americans, not your mortal enemies. Go find someone who you suspect you disagree with. Be curious about why they think what they think. And in the moment when they say to you the thing that you can't stand, reach out to them and say, tell me more about that.
We spent a lot of time together.
We have.
gone on journeys together. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about what's called Bridging the Gap. We were there, and we captured it all when there was 2 schools. That would have been 2020. There was 9 schools by 2021. There was 19 schools within 2022, and you just finished training 35 schools.
People don't want to communicate across lines of difference. They want to hunker down with their friends where they feel safe and secure and validated. Shame on us for not equipping them to do something different.
There is an implicit social fear to share controversial political ideas.
I had a hesitancy to share my faith because I wasn't sure if they would allow room for me to express my faith.
Oberlin College and Spring Arbor University did the first ever Bridging the Gap program where students from the 2 campuses came together to learn courageous conversation skills. The skills, they sound basic. They're listening, providing feedback, and telling stories. But it turns out you don't learn them anywhere.
Simon's toolkit includes a lot of active listening and a lot of open-ended questions, and especially a lot of open-mindedness on the part of the person who is offended.
We have students who've said, this changed my life, it transformed my life. So that's not just because they learn like the building blocks of listening. Right? Something deeper happened. So let's keep building on that.
From what I've seen, the most useful dialogue moments are the ones where you're willing to let it go south before it goes north. It's going to get bad before it gets good. If you're not willing to let it get bad, you're not actually in dialogue.
Gosh, if I have to be uncomfortable and I have to be ready for punishment and I have to do all this listening and be so grateful and be humble and of service and be curious, why would I do this? And I mean, I guess for me, I don't think there's another choice. If we don't have these conversations, we will not turn this country around. I know that.
Let's bring up Simon. That's a serious introduction. It's funny because, again, we use these films for different things and not always in this order. So I'm reacting in a certain way, in real time, in the way you are and you are as well. I know we want to tell the story of the work we've done in North Carolina and Israel and Palestine. That's why we're here today. But I do think as background, that's really important because we had talked earlier about like where does this come from and why do we want to do this work. And I think that's some of it. But before we jump into that, react to anything I've said so far and the film, and let's transition to the other film when we can, but I'm sure you have something you want to say.
I just feel totally embarrassed. That's the first thing. So that's good. Yeah, I mean, I think the relevance of that for what we're going to talk about with Israel and Palestine is we didn't get into the Israel-Palestine business because we were experts in that. We got into it because we were bridge builders, and that seemed like the thing that most people were running away from when it came to bridging. Like, I don't want to hear from that team. I don't want to hear from that side. And so I've worked on issues related to Israel and the Palestinian territories for a long time, but it was not part of the bridging stuff that I did so much. And so I think like our class at UNC was called Courageous Conversations, Israel and Palestine on campus. It wasn't called the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and that we really had to come in through the Courageous Conversations door. Like we had to start with this idea that you want to be someone who sits face to face with people you disagree with, that you have the will to do that, and then you have the skill to do it, and then you could even do that on this issue that people don't seem to want to do it on. But our credibility wasn't that, like, we worked with a Muslim colleague, but it wasn't like, oh, a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim are going to teach you about Israel and Palestine. It was like the people who are committed to bridge building want this to be an acceptable place to build bridges around as well. So,
yeah. I'll just give you a little background. I'm going to go to the other film, okay? Last year, at the beginning of this film, you'll see that we went to, Simon and I went to Israel and Palestine together. We'll explain sort of how and why that came about afterwards. And then last fall, well, let me first say that October 7th, 2023, we were at our gathering. And you'll see that Simon announced it to our group, what had happened. So that's where we were when that happened. We went to Israel just a couple months later. We brought bridge builders there. We filmed everything. And then we brought people from the Middle East, Palestinians, Arab Israelis, you know, and Americans with a voice. And we did, you know, some like fishbowl conversation kind of things on stage. We did scary things at a time when most people were really scared to do those things. I'm not saying that just to be provocative, but we did. Like, we did those things. And, you know, we had a lot of presidents of universities and academics there. And when the session ended, a number of them had reached out, but North Carolina said, would you come do this down at UNC? Would you teach this class? And we said, yeah, we'll do it. And this was, I don't know, sometime around October 10th of last fall. And so we scrambled and like threw it together, and we ended up with 26 kids in a class. And as you'll see, we take them to Israel and Palestine, and it was intense. I give UNC a lot of credit. They spent some money. It was not cheap, and they took risks. And we weren't welcomed with, you know, flower petals when we walked on campus. You'll see that too. But it was quite an experience, and that'll give you a little bit of background, sort of where this came from.
Can I say two quick things before we go? One, Tom gave UNC credit, and that's true. I would also just give Tom credit. I don't think I'm Jewish. I don't think there are a lot of non-Jewish organizations that over the last 19 months were like, yes, we should put this on stage. That's awesome. Let's get Israelis and Palestinians and bring them to the US and have them talk. People didn't want to do that. So you can ask Tom later, like, why did he decide he was willing to take those risks? And then the other thing I just want to mention, thank you. Just quickly, because I'm sure it's not lost on people here, like, we say Israel and Palestine. And some of you are probably then trying to interpret, well, they're saying Israel/Palestine? Are they saying Israel-Palestine? Do they mean Israel and Palestinian territories? No, they mean Israel and the West Bank. No, I think they mean Israel and the occupied territories. No, they mean Judea and Samaria. No, wait, what do they actually mean? And so in our class, we did the list I just did, but 19 versions of it, to say people are so intense about this that they're looking for cues. If it's a dash or a slash, right? You mean 48 or you mean 67. They're looking to demonize you and make you not credible. And so we've landed on Israel and Palestine, right? But we're not unaware that for some people, that leaves like 17 other questions unanswered. And I say that to illustrate the point that, as you all know, it's complicated and we're not clueless about the judgment that is drawn on every single piece of punctuation. So anyway, and as Tom said, there were not rose petals, is that what you said? Flower petals thrown out? And if you want at the end, we can talk more about the negative attacks we received for trying to do the class and what we had to sort of persevere through, but we did. So do that, right?
The general consensus is that this class shouldn't exist, and I'm scared.
I am fearful, I am nervous, I'm scared.
I'm also feeling a little bit anxious because of the tension that usually comes with the Israel-Palestine conflict situation.
I know that a lot of Muslim students are scared to take the class.
I wish more people would come to the table and have an honest discussion, but I also understand it.
Society seems to have this weird culture about canceling people for their opinions. There seems to be only one right answer.
If a sound comes from that side, that's a bad sound. That means that we are shot at. In that case, I will scream floor, and everyone will do the following thing.
You know, I'm going to start by saying I do not have any interest in going to Israel with a bunch of do-gooders who somehow think that we're going to solve a complex problem for them. It's not going to happen.
This morning, on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, Israel was attacked.
From the river to the sea!
What they were committed to was the complete destruction of Israel and killing all the Jews. I mean, they're really committed to perpetrating a second Holocaust. That's their mission.
We are Hamas! Yes, we're all Hamas! No!
It's scary to be a Jew. It's dangerous out there in the world. There's a lot to be afraid of.
I see the Israeli devaluation of Palestinian life.
Stop the genocide now!
If you don't live in Israel or in Gaza, then you have no idea what's going on.
I came all the way from Jerusalem to tell you that for thousands of years, so much blood was spilled on this land. There must be people now that will plant the seeds, that will tell a different story.
We've been on a journey to cross lines of difference, even though it's hard. We're going to bring people from Israel and from Palestine, and we're going to put it on stage, and we're going to talk about this stuff because we can't be afraid.
If you were going to think about American students, what did they miss?
Palestinians are not one or two-dimensional characters. They're human beings who have an actual story.
Everybody here has a birthright. One birthright means there is no birthright to the other.
Both sides are acting as victims.
And there isn't just one side versus another side. There's like a million sides.
I spent many years trying to convince Israelis to listen to my story, and it's when I shut up and listen that they listen to mine. And I think it's vice versa. When we shut up and listen is when people listen to us.
I feel like you're having too good a time here. Too many people have come up to me and said they liked what I said, which means I'm failing. I need to shake things up a little bit. Very often, the arguments we have are proxies for much deeper things that are harder to say. We're always talking about something else. It begins with, do you see my pain? Do you see me?
This is something out of nightmares. That hopelessness carried into the Nova fields.
So this is the road we came in on, and now the road's blocked again.
And this is over the course of how long?
2 hours. 2 hours. We came through here this morning.
The settlements are growing around us. Where do you want me to go?
The Israeli soldier immediately pulls his rifle, and I could see down the barrel.
Often, all Palestinians are being called enemies. All Palestinians are being called terrorists. That's absolutely incorrect. People open their home to you that want to give you the last piece of bread in their home, the tea, all of a sudden when you're sitting in a tent with a family that seems to have nothing, somehow there's a cup of tea in front of you. They're no one's enemy, they're people. That's not being shown on TV. What's being shown is the gore, the numbers, but these numbers represent people.
And it's fucked up that when I sit and listen to your stories, I think, what about my story? And that is what is going to kill our ability to make progress, because I don't feel empathy. The more Jews and the more Palestinians who get killed, the more I can't feel empathy and the more I don't want to listen. I'm supposed to be Captain Pluralism over here, and I know the solution is to build bridges. I know it.
There are irreconcilable forces dictating the reality, and they will not be persuaded by arguments about pluralism. And I think it's important to understand that fighting back against those forces and the ideology that they represent is not just about the language of hope and saying we can do it and saying we need to understand each other. That's all important. But we also need to be very, very tough and take away their capability to dictate our future.
Israel is not alone in the world. It's not omnipotent. We are strong, but not omnipotent. We need understanding of the free world.
I would love to think that we here could be helpful with what's happening over there. I think in a very, very, very marginal way. Maybe we could. The truth of the matter is I think we could be more helpful here.
Serious escalation says demonstrators stormed campus buildings around the country.
This is the University of Southern California,
UCLA,
the University of Florida,
Columbia
University of Chicago.
We're doing a whole thing with higher education. We'll take what we have here and the pieces of the films and we'll take them out into the world.
Demonstrators have now gathered protesting on UNC's campus.
There I was, sitting with my friends. We saw about 400 to 500 people, a lot of them saying, "No Zionists, welcome here." As a Jewish American, that was really tough to hear. We saw the American flag come down. Watching your flag be torn down and put something else up, you're saying, it's us against you. We're not united under that flag anymore. And so we moved in and put the flag back up. We were called fascists, racists, that we should go kill ourselves.
We love you, Brendan.
I had water and yogurt poured all over me, and it turned into one of probably the worst events that could have happened on campus, something that made national news. It was really tough. Every time I come back here and I look at that flag, I think of that event. And I think about how us as students weren't able to hear each other out.
We're going to do a class on Israel-Palestine. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, no, you got to do that.
We're going on a mission to try to tackle the thing that a lot of people are running away from.
The course is Israel-Palestine, but it's really Israel-Palestine on campus.
We want to create a culture where the heroes are the bridge builders. We want to lift you up as heroes who are willing to take the risk and show other students on other campuses that people are brave and willing to have these hard conversations.
I feel so much pent-up anxiety and fear.
My walls were almost physically up.
I'm from Eritrea. I wanted to open myself up. And when I came here, I was so surprised to see how much social censorship there is.
There was fear about everything. After 3 or so classes, they still were afraid to tell friends that they were taking this class.
To engage in disagreement agreeably. That, of course, is what a university is supposed to be.
I think you are taking us to a much deeper ethical moral journey, which is incredibly beautiful.
If you just want to take, we'll just fight. If you want to give, listen.
There has been an onslaught of resistance. The Muslim Student Association ended up boycotting the class. Palestinian scholars wouldn't even come speak in the class. The Daily Tar Heel was threatened with acts of violence. And the trip, which was the capstone of our class, was labeled as a genocide field trip. I think they're afraid that if you let students engage seriously, people end up with a much more complex view, frankly, than the view that some of our critics would like people to hold.
The courage you have to do what you're doing is really important. Wouldn't it be amazing if what was cool on campus was not to be automatically pro-Israel or automatically pro-Palestinian, because that is what keeps you in your social group? And what I love about what Tom and Simon are doing is they're giving you an opportunity to create a social group that is defined by being serious.
I know the divide, what is happening in the US today. It's horrible. Don't take sides. This is not gonna help any of us. I don't want someone to raise a Palestinian flag at Columbia University. This is not the purpose.
To hate someone, you have to know him. We don't know each other. Seems that we need a shock, an earthquake to wake up. What is happening now is part of it. Hoping that will lead us to wake up and figure out another plan.
This problem's been around for a long time. This is at the core of, can people with deeply held differences who don't want to water down their differences and come to just see it all the same way, can they find a way to constructively coexist?
The music stops, and at the mic we hear, "Red alert! Red alert!" I served in the army, I've seen movies, but I never imagined that I will see two girls scream for their mother to help them and no one can help them.
How are you? Confused.
Angry.
Angry.
Nauseous.
Nauseous.
Frozen.
Inspired. Hopeless.
If you talk to Brendan, he said, I knew all this stuff. I never felt any of this stuff. And feeling it is the whole idea.
It's opening parts of me and parts of my spirituality that I think I had never shared before.
Me and Brendan went to the wall and he did, I don't know what it's called, but he did like the traditional Jewish prayer with me.
He opened up himself to me and like cared about me and like what I was going through. I think that's what's beautiful about this group, about this whole thing.
These are my brothers. It's the same way that my Muslims are my brothers. These are my brothers, and we're just sitting here praying for each other. You know, I was supposed to be. I just felt something. I don't know. I almost cried. So it was really beautiful.
The fact that we get to do that together and go through that journey together, that moment is a culmination of all of it. This willingness to be part of each other's story. It meant a lot to me.
One of our theories about this work and the approach we've used is that the investment in how you have the conversation makes it possible to have the hardest conversations much more productively.
It was wrestling, not a very comfortable thing, but because it was based off mutual struggle and learning, we found the humanity in everybody.
Now, the kids who were afraid to tell their friends they're taking the class, they're going to the very people they were afraid to tell, and now they're talking to them about why they took the class. And so I think we've transformed out of the fear into some courage.
I really feel like this is what I came to college to do, to feel like I'm actively challenging myself. I can easily say it's been the best class I've ever taken, the decision I'm most grateful to have made this entire year.
I just never imagined community building with empathy and love being at the center until I saw it change me and people around me as well. Seeing my own Arab friends becoming more open to dialogue, willing to see the other side, that's so meaningful.
Wednesday will be a year ago since the protest happened. And I'm sitting in this class with people that have extremely different views than I probably do, that probably disagree with me on a lot, but I'm talking to them, and not only am I talking to them, I'm bonding with them, I'm loving them, and I'm receiving the same love back. And for me, if you kind of compare that to a year ago, where those same types of people were screaming at me and yelling at me, and we were on different sides, of this conflict, not understanding or humanizing one another, it's amazing. Like I start getting emotional because I'm sitting in there saying goodbye to these people that are my friends that I consider like just close, like so close, and I have so much love for all of them. I just wanted to say thank you to this class for giving me an experience that shaped my life more than any other has.
I want to just give a little context on the kids, on the students. I always say kids, and I shouldn't say kids. There were a number of Muslim kids in the class who you do actually see them in the film, but they, one of them, we were at the Dead Sea, and you could see Jordan on the other side, and there's some hills over there, and she said, I live on the other side of that hill. I live 45 minutes from where we were, and my parents don't know I'm here. You know, they think she's back in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And they can never know. And my friends can never know. And I'm making this point because I want to be clear. She wasn't afraid to take the class. She was afraid of being known to have taken the class. She wasn't alone. There was another woman who's Emirati who was in the film and was a critical piece of the film. And then her father forbade her from playing any part in the film, so we had to take her out of the film. I'm going to guess, just, you know, we did not go for, you know, Jews and Muslims or Arabs and Israelis. Like, we didn't do that. We tried to get as much as we could the baseball player and the, you know, the regular kids, and some of them were Jewish and some of them were Muslim. I think that part of it worked out pretty well. I'm going to guess, because I can't prove any of what I'm about to say, but at least 10 were very anti-Israeli. Israel's right to exist, wasn't into any of that when it began, and you know, there was some number of people certainly who were Zionists the minute they walked in the door. To the extent that they were anti-Palestinian, it depends on, you know, are we talking about Hamas? My point is, there was a really nice spread of students and a lot of different opinions, some of which, unfortunately, you don't get to see reflected in the film because of some of the reasons that I just described. And I will also add that I feel I totally bless, or whatever, who am I? I feel like they made really tough decisions, and I respect the reasons that they did not want to be in the film. Simple as that. And at least one of them had agreed in advance, and it turned out didn't happen. Anyway, that was a bit of context. I don't know if you want to say anything also about the students. And
yeah, sure. Yeah, I think your point that the goal was not Jews, Muslims fight better. Like, that wasn't the idea behind the class. We made a strong argument that we wanted, as Tom said, the pitcher from the baseball team and the young woman from the riding club and the guy doing the internship at Goldman Sachs. And because this isn't a Jewish-Muslim problem, right? It's a campus culture problem. And it's not going to change because the few Jews and the few Muslims at Chapel Hill talk better with each other. It's going to change because campus leaders, student leaders say, wait. We don't just demonize the people we disagree with. We actually, we started this argument, you heard me say it in the film, that the heroes are the bridge builders. Like, they would say that's like our mantra. When we're being a little bit provocative, I'll say the cowards are the people who want to hunker down with the people they already agree with, and the bullies are the ones who want to cancel the other team, or the heroes are the ones who want to cross lines of difference. Don't you want to be a hero? And maybe the first 4 or 5 classes is what it took for them to say, and that's almost like mission accomplished. Like, once they decide, I want to be in the heroic bridge building team, right? And I'm proud to be on that team. Now you can talk about anything. Now you can sort of explore anything. And then we teach them the skills. So how do you actually do that? You sit down with the guy who you disagree with, you do it constructively. So we could talk more about the skills. But the leap was that they kind of didn't know. You heard Tal Becker say the thing in the film about being serious. They didn't know that you could be on Team Bridge Builder or Team Serious, and that was a cool place to be.
And I think that's the threshold we have to cross, because once they're in that camp, then simple answers and placards as policy and all that, they dismiss it themselves. They don't need us to tell them that. They're like, it seems pretty simple for a 2,000-year-old conflict. Like, you're going to summarize it. I don't know about that, but they have to come to that, and they have to come to it because they first get courageous about their willingness to reject the too simple stories they're hearing.
Yeah, the other thing I would add, I have such strong feelings for these students. We, too, got to know them incredibly well. And we met with 4 members of the Muslim Student Association to ask them to come take the class before. This was in November of last year. And it was a really nice conversation. And then we met with the faculty advisor of the Muslim Student Association, who really did not like us very much, and basically said the only way I'll recommend anyone take this class is if we can declare Israel an apartheid state in advance. And there were conditions, basically. And we said, well, that's just not what we do, and we can't do that. And long story short, the next day, those 4 kids told us they couldn't take the class. Okay, that's not why I'm telling the story. That's the setup for, we got to know them. We took them to lunch. We invited them to the class. They kind of ditched us for a while, and then they came. They came to the class. We got to know them personally. We got to know the kids from SJP. SJP does not like what we were doing here. A variety of entities don't like what we're attempting to do. But I got to tell you that, for me, my background is in business, and you got to get on airplanes to sell and to solve problems and to manufacture. On a college campus, you can just walk to the building over there. You can walk to the dorm. You can say, will you meet me for lunch? And it's incredible the way, at the end of the summer, there was this kid, Toby, who ran Transparency. It's a play on UNC. And it's basically hated us, right? Hates our department, hates conservatives, by the way, we are a mix of politics. I know that this is always part of this conversation. But, trust me, in this classroom, amongst the people teaching the class, the visitors, we had a massive, there's no identifiable this, that, or the other thing. But on one of the last days, I went to get something to eat. And on my walk across campus, I saw Sammy. Sammy's the head of the Muslim Student Association, and Toby, who's the head of Transparency. And like, hey, how's it going? And they gave me a kind wave. Both of them in different places. And I thought, like, this is amazing. And it's amazing. And last thing I'll say is, when you heard the way Brendan sort of shared that emotion at the end, oh my God, they had to do video diaries, right? So the first week, we got 26 video diaries. 26 people said afraid. 26 people said scared. 26, every one of them. That was the predominant video diary. It was, I am afraid. At the end, the predominant video diary was how much they love the other kids in the class. And I left out part of the story, which is one of the reasons we became close with Sammy and with Toby and others is because they are friends with them. And they dialogued throughout the whole course, the whole time. And that culture, I can't give you numbers because I don't know the numbers. I know those 26 kids were radically altered. I know that campus was radically altered. To what extent, I can't say exactly, but it's amazing, when you go through that sort of courageous hole, what comes out on the other.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the point you made, Tom, that our posture was we're not going to apologize for where we stand, but we're always going to invite the critics in. And I think this was very surprising to people. So Tom referenced the meeting with the faculty advisor for the Muslim Student Association. He basically said, stipulate to the fact that it's genocide and apartheid state, or why would I work with you? And I was like, well, I won't stipulate to that, but if you want to come to class and say that, you should come to class. Like, you'd be totally welcome. And he said something dismissive like, well, if you look at the evidence and you're a well-intentioned person, then you'd have to agree with me, so you're obviously not a well-intentioned person, so why would I come to your class? I was like, I don't know if I know what a tautology is, but I think that might have been one. And so, like, I can't agree to that, but I would love for you to come to the class. I emailed him every week for the whole semester. He never responded. But our students heard us say again and again, like, we got attacked in the Daily Tar Heel, and we brought the paper to class, we passed it out, and like, we should talk about this. Like, this is what they're saying about us, about you, let's discuss it. And I think the fearlessness to say, like, we're not afraid of the critics. Like, welcome the critics, bring them. They have a place at the table too. It softened the criticism, but more than anything, it bolstered the courage of the students. Because they're like, oh, these guys aren't full of it. Like, they're actually not afraid. I mean, maybe we are afraid, but they're willing to move through their fear, and so we should too. So I think that was really important in the spirit of it. They also did these final projects where they had to take what they'd learned in class and go public with it. So we had this question all along, is it worth all this work for 26 students? But every student had to do a project that brought their learning out into the campus community in some way. And so probably 1,000 students were directly affected through it, plus all the media that happened on campus and then the film. So our idea is that these students, we actually created at the end of the semester a fellowship called Courageous Conversations Fellowship that almost every student applied for because they want to continue the journey. So I think we see these like clusters of students who have this transformative experience as an engine for bringing this kind of approach out to their peers and beyond.
I want to go back for 1 minute, and part of what you saw in there, we did this thing called American Neighbor. Not long after George Floyd, we did a series of events from Minneapolis to New Orleans, where we went from all the way down the Mississippi River, and we would do live gatherings on the river. Just thematically, it made sense. We had to be outside. It was the height of COVID. You saw some of that in the film. It was pretty intense. It was also beautiful. Like, both things are definitely true. It was a beautiful and difficult experience. We captured it all on film, and that's actually going to be a film that's coming out soon. But I bring it up because I want to get a little bit into methodology. And I won't say there's a debate, because there's not really a debate. I do think that, for me, I start with, this is about love. A lot of people think that's corny. They kind of don't want to hear it in the beginning. But in the end, you're going to have to give of yourself, and the rewards that you're going to get are going to be irreplaceable. And I make the argument that that's critical to democracy, whatever. And Simon believes this too. But Simon also has methodology that is far more tactical than everything I just said. And what he does really well is he employs that in every gathering we do, And I mention it in this context because when you're doing one event for 2 hours on the river at an intense moment, it's hard to do all of those things and come out 2 hours later with some degree of success. Like, that's a real challenge. On the other hand, if you have 13 weeks and a retreat and maybe a trip, but maybe not, I don't think that's actually critical to this being successful. It's the mix of those two things that I think are most useful to the work. And I would say that one of the nice things that we've had the opportunity to do is to fail a lot. Like, we failed a lot. We've been out there, and I don't even know exactly what failure means. Like, we did this one particular thing at the Nantucket project, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said that was pluralistic malpractice. Now, I wanted to say that was the most bullshit term I've ever heard in my life. But whatever the case, I thought, that's all anyone talked about was that incident for like the next 2 days. And I thought, was that really pluralistic malpractice, or was that an exhibition of truth on a level that none of us actually get? Because they said nasty things to each other, basically, is what happened. I don't know. Like, isn't that real life? Like, isn't that the world that we live in? And is hiding behind ourselves actually productive, or is there something to the challenges going the way the challenges go? Now, having said that, I don't want anyone to like end up in, there are certain things we all fear, and I think they make us fearful for a reason. But I would say to you, Simon, that experience, that failure, the number of failures that we've had, and thankfully the number of successes, and staying at it, and doing it in a world where the stakes aren't as high. The stakes are higher on a college university, and on a college campus, and I respect that in a really big way. But I want you to know, a lot of the mistakes that allowed us to know some of the things we know came in a place where we let ourselves fail. And I think there's just something critical. That comment on anything I just said.
Yeah, a couple quick things. One, I think Tom said to me the first night we were on this trip down to Mississippi, I was facilitating these conversations, public conversations on race, black people, white people, whatever. And Tom said, you're going out to facilitate, like, you probably have an ideal sense in your mind of what it's supposed to look like what success will be. He's like, you gotta let it go, or you're gonna blow it. He's like, you can't fail. Just like do it, do your best, let the energy flow. And he's like, and frankly, if it goes badly, it'll make better TV. But that aside, like, it's fine. And I think the freedom for me, as the facilitator, the person doing it, like, oh, I'm not going to get in trouble if it goes sideways. Like, you have to make room for that, because once you tense up and try to stop it from going sideways, that's when it goes really sideways. So that was the first thing. The second thing, we said to the students about our trip, but about the class in general, like, yes, we'd like you to come out of this class with more knowledge, more facts, more information. That's like the floor. What I'd really like you to do is come out of it with more conviction that this is complicated. That's like somewhere above the floor. But I was like, but the highest aspiration, like, why are we going to come to Chapel Hill every week, is I want it to change your life. Like, I want you to decide to live differently, to the lines you draw, the assumptions you make, the questions you're willing to consider. I want you to live in an alive way, not an afraid, tight way. And that's why it's worth doing this class. And I think that higher aspiration for them as well was like, whoa, we're being invited, like, called up to something, not told we should just know the difference between 48, 67, and 73. So methodologically speaking, I'll just do two quick examples.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm going to just do one thing, and then I want you to do that. I want to add to the point that he just made, because I love this quote. I'm going to blow the quote, but you'll get the idea. This one student, not kid, said, this class allowed me to experience an absence of the poison that I've lived with for my whole life. You know, and when he said it, I said, what is it you specifically mean? And he was like, fear, social media, I'm always afraid of that. And I thought, wow, like he's being literal. For his whole life, he's been afraid of these things. And the way, when he described it as a poison, it just hit me so hard. I do want to, we have 25 minutes, we want to have questions, and we want to talk a little bit about methodology, but go ahead.
Yeah, so just as a couple of examples, I mentioned what we did at the end of class with these public projects, but we did an opening retreat, so it was a 6-hour retreat before class started that was all about skills building. And it was sort of not in a classroom setting, it was at the Carolina Inn, kind of retreat feeling, where we taught the basic skills of how you cross lines of difference constructively. So it was like an important methodological point. Second, we said to the students, we're not going to talk about Israel for weeks. Like, you're going to be 4 or 5 weeks into this class before we touch on the topic. First, we're going to dig into what it means to get out of high conflict. We read Amanda Ripley's book, for those of you who know high conflict. We brought in a corrections officer and someone who's formerly incarcerated to talk about how they work together as an example of how you have to humanize, quote, the enemy if you're going to make any progress. Now, the students at the time didn't know that that was going to foreshadow what Israelis and Palestinians need to do if they're going to make progress. But it was like, whoa, a real corrections officer and a real person who served 27 years in the same prisons, and they're talking to each other and hugging each other and talking about how hard it is to humanize. So we did all that before we even got to Israel. Then when we got to Israel, we said, I'm not going to talk about the conflict until the last 5 weeks of class. We're going to not talk about the conflict till the last 5 weeks of class. We're going to learn this topic first. I'm not going to talk about apartheid, genocide, colonialism. We're not going to do it yet because it wouldn't make any sense. Like, frankly, you don't know anything. So then in the learning journey, I assigned half the class a book by Rashid Khalidi called The 100 Years' War on Palestine, and another half the class a set of options for a Zionist text. Right? So half the class read the first book, half the class read the second book, and then in teams of 4, 2 people who read this book and 2 who read that book, they had to construct a timeline of the conflict. Right? So, well, it's fascinating because one book left out that 73 there was a war. Right? The other just was missing. The other one left out that anyone was expelled in 48. It was just missing. And so when they got together to start doing their timeline, they're like, wait, what happened then? Well, that wasn't in my book. It's like, these are the definitive texts, but they're both telling their own story, right? And then their final project on the timelines was after the timelines, they had to submit like a commentary on what was missing in the stories. And then they read the other book, right? So that was an early example of like a methodological piece that, it's easy enough to do and it really worked. And then late in the class, after our trip, we came back, we picked 50 characters who have shaped the conflict over the last 100 years. So from Arafat to Herzl to whoever. Ben-Gurion, Clinton, Trump. And we asked students to pick a character who they thought they disagreed with and prepare a 5 to 7 minute monologue where they had to do perspective taking. They had to be that character. They had to stand in front of the group and give a 5 to 7 minute talk as if they were that person, and then answer questions staying in character. So it did a couple of things. One, it brought 26 voices from the conflict into the room. Right? So they got to learn history through first-person accounts done by a third person. And then they had to actually embody, like say these words. And so the young woman Tom mentioned from Jordan, she played Netanyahu. And so for her to say what he believes, like not as a caricature, but full-throatedly embrace it, is like an act of civil courage, like to actually say those words and to try to feel it. Like, oh, what's it like to be him? Which, if you're in the negotiations business or if you're in the social change business, you have to, right, embody the other people's perspective if you're going to make progress with them. And then our most Zionist student did Arafat. And like to watch him, like you could see him like choking on, can I actually get these words out of my mouth? But it made everybody listen, right? And he took it seriously. Like whether I think this person is a Nobel laureate, Nobel Peace Prize winner, or a terrorist, or both, I have to understand how he sees the world. So having them do that for 2 classes, 26 personas brought to life was really a powerful exercise. So I mentioned those, the early skills building, the focus on other issues, and how you have courage to cross lines of difference all happening before we talk about it, the conflict itself, the timeline, and then the monologues and the final project. Probably the essence of what methodologically worked in the class. I think underneath all of that is what Tom talked about, this ethos, right? That there's something deeper we're trying to do here. We're not just trying to learn 2 different histories. We're trying to invite you to live differently. But those were some of the methodological pieces. We thought for this group, people would be interested in the specific, like, what did you do? So I wanted to share a little bit of that.
I want to add too, and Dan Honan, Aaron New, I'm pointing these 2 out because the most laborious part of the work that we do is capture, edit, deliver this film work, and those 2 guys do that work. But I'm mentioning it. I'm mentioning it because we want to make everything you've seen and much more available to anybody who wants it. I mean, Ali Abu Awad, you know, he spent time in an Israeli prison. You would have called him a terrorist some number of years ago. You saw him in the film. He talked about the Palestinian flag over Columbia. 90 minutes of film, which is just an amazing 90 minutes. Tal Becker, who, you know, about being serious. There's 90 minutes of that. Like, you know, all of this stuff we want to make available to anyone who wants it and needs it, in addition to all the things that we're going to edit together and allowing, you know, to let students model. I mean, I'm just amazed. You know, it's such a corny word, but modeling works really well. And when on film, people can witness students doing this in a productive way. Here's the thing. You know, in my day, there was jokes about Chairman Mao, I guess yesterday or the day before. When I was at Brown, it was Che Guevara, right? Like that was really cool. We have no idea why. He just looks cool in a beret, and so we wore the T-shirt. It is cool to be a Brit. It's cool. It's cool because it's brave. You know, it's really brave what these kids are doing, and they do it like they really did emerge as like heroes. You know, heroes are whatever. Called upon in the moment, whatever that line is. And when you watch it happen, it's very real. And it's transformative in the sense that I think it turns them into individuals. It's hard to be an individual now. You know, you pretend to be an individual because you're shown on social media how to be an individual. What if you were actually an individual? What would that feel like? Like, isn't that what nuance is? And I think these kids started to wear that. Like, they started to wear this courage and this understanding of themselves in ways that I just think was incredibly beautiful. Anyway, I do want to share that those things are and will be available to anybody who's
You also
interested
didn't mention, we use short films like the one you saw here today.
Yeah.
We use a series of short films, one about forgiveness, one about acceptance. We use the films really powerfully, and I think that's why Tom's also mentioning that they're available to others who want them. Showing a 12-minute film and then having the students talk about what they saw in the film having the guest speakers come, having people Zoom in from Israel and from the Palestinian territories to share their perspective. Like all of that made it not just like some set of professors and the students, but it invited all these other voices in. And I think the films create a shared experience for students that then they can talk about the thing they saw in the film, which is easier than talking about like the thing I'm feeling. They can reference that thing over there. And so I think the films also really helped. You want to
We should go to questions, yeah. You want to call? Go ahead.
I'm just curious whether you think this sort of methodology would work. Two questions really. So would it work virtually? And do you think you could also kind of shorten the timeline and have the same impact or meaningful impact?
Yeah. I don't think you can have the same impact, but I think you can have a meaningful impact. We did, during the pandemic, we did some of this work on Zoom and virtually, and I think it worked pretty well. There were some students who said it was even better. Like they were more willing to speak the truth or be courageous, protected by the Zoom than sitting face to face. I find, honestly, the flip side is more often the case, that people are uglier on Zoom because you don't feel the human in front of you, but some students said that. What was the second part of the question? Virtually and?
Shorter.
Yeah.
Just thinking of pragmatics, right, for application.
I think on the skills stuff, and we teach 5 skills: purpose, storytelling, feedback, listening, and power. Happy to share more about those. I think you can teach the skills virtually and you can teach them more quickly. The campuses I've gone to this year where we've done Israel and Palestine quickly, I wouldn't recommend it. It's so charged that people, they come for the fight, and unless you have time to be like, well, okay, fair enough, you're angry, that's great, do you want to come next week and let's really talk about it? If you don't have that, people just want to blow up that event. And so I haven't felt great about our one-offs on Israel and Palestine, but on criminal justice reform, on climate change, on abortion, on equal marriage, on Trump and the MAGA movement, on all those things, I think the skills and the discussion can be productive and quicker than a full semester, for sure.
Way in the back.
Hi, thank you. First of all, really interesting, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I would love to hear the details about the skills building, and also I wonder if you have a set of discourse norms that the students or your participants have to adhere to, and that you'll cut something off. Like you said, there was a moment where things, I forget what you called it, pluralistic malpractice, right?
Yeah.
So did you learn something from that? You have to, create some boundaries.
Yeah. There certainly are some, and I think generally we want to answer your question thoroughly, which means we probably won't answer it right now, right? Like I just don't think we can. I do want to say that at a minimum, and I remember when we were addressing this, we'll invite anybody in, but they need to come with some generosity of spirit, and I feel like that would be, whatever that means, I think just saying that does change the playing field a little bit, and by I think making that expression to somebody, you're already beginning to meet somewhere in the middle, and I think it's really important to say that. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I put up this invitation, which is how we started the class. It's actually how we start all the work that we do. Every gathering, every convening, we start with these 4 ideas. I won't go into them in depth, but take seriously the things that others hold dear. If it matters to you, it'll matter to us. We're not here to convince anyone they're wrong or try to change them. We're curious why they think how they do. We don't think we're diminished but are enhanced by hearing things we disagree with. And we believe there's more common ground and experience than we might expect. But even when we fundamentally disagree, we can still respect, even love people. So we start with that idea. And we'll say to students, now break into pairs and talk about where this may be hard for you to do. Right? And people are like, well, but I want to change people. I'm like, yeah, me too. I spent 25 years of my career trying to change people. That's fine, but maybe in the first conversation, listen more and change them less. How about that? So we start with that, and students say, like, okay, I'll try that. And we'll say in groups, maybe you don't want to live this way, but for 2 hours, will you try to do this? Just for 2 hours. And then we go and teach the skills that try to help people. Okay, you've said you want to live into this invitation. Here are the skills to help you do it. We can talk more about those skills some other time. And then we've invited the students to create, we called it here, their own shared traditions. They wanted to bring food to class. They wanted to speak in I statements. They made them up. I referenced a bunch of shared traditions from the Bible to the I Have a Dream speech to the base of the Statue of Liberty as like, what are our shared traditions? And then said, you make up for our class, what are our shared traditions? They want to end the session with gratitude. And so they created kind of norms that if we're trying to do this and we're trying to practice these skills, this is the tradition we want to build of how we're going to be with each other. They had a lot of ideas about connecting out of class, going to each other's things, having coffee with each other. And so we never had a moment in class where, we had a lot in our other work where things got somewhat ugly. But in class, even when someone would say something that was harsh or hard, someone else would say, like, I think what he's trying to get at, like, let me help you back into the conversation, because I think we'd done a lot of laying the foundation up front.
Go ahead, right here. Yes.
One of the things that's so interesting about your talk and the film is I keep having questions, but then I have more as you go. So just what you were just saying, it's kind of like I feel like you're saying that we are all conversation, we're the ensemble builders, we're the conversation ensemble builders. Mm-hmm. That is what we're taking from. Right? And then I think you said actually earlier too that it's the conversation that people are creating. And when you also talked about the impact it's having on campus, I wonder about that, right? Because when people are becoming conversation creators, then we are actually all environment builders, but we don't get related to it.
Yeah.
So in a class where you're relating to students as the builders of that environment, you start to see that, well, I am that, and I can do that in other places. I wonder if that is also impacting the rest of the college, and then it made me think of one of the things that you're making your own news, right? That we don't learn a lot from the news.
Right.
But you're making your own news.
I think I love the observation, and I think you asked both a question and made a statement that I feel very strongly about. There are a number of people who have supported us over the years who they come to the table angry. They're pissed, and they want us, can you go do this for me kind of thing? Yeah. Can you tell that person that,
Go get a pound of flesh. That's what I want.
Yeah. And the conversation is magical. Like, we don't have to go in with the data like perfect in order for this to succeed. And very often they're learning about even the history, the new from each other, literally from each other. And some of that again is I think this willingness to, people are going to cry. That I think is most important about the films. Like, some of our films they're heart-wrenching. And the next thing you know, some person in class is describing the way they were raised, and it's hard to hear. And other kids are crying. Well, now this is happening, right? So now you're now in a totally different planet, and the notion of the facts, because that's generally what it is. Like, tell them the facts about what actually happened in '67. It's like, it's actually not that important. I don't want to diminish anything. But in the end, the conversation really takes over, I think, and it's hard for us to maintain the conversation. It's less hard for us to maintain the facts. Like, I just don't think that becomes the central thing.
And I also echo a lot of what Tom said, and I think your point is a good one. I think what we saw with students is they come in looking to see which label goes on each other student.
Yeah.
There are other people who have the same label as me, and pretty quickly we complicate through a series of different films and other exercises that we're way more than our labels. And that frees them up. And at the end, we had one student who she ended up not being able to be in the film, as Tom mentioned, because of her dad. But she would say she's a person of color, and some white students in a very extreme group, when she told them about her trip and how powerful it was, they called her a white supremacist. And she was like, this is how wacky it is. And we didn't need to tell her that she didn't need to be cool with them anymore. Like, they had made it quite evident that that was not the group she wanted to be in, right? Because they were just about a label, right? And they've tried to put her back in a box. And I think by curating the conversation, letting them curate them, they come into their own.
Go ahead. Can I go?
Yeah.
I'm dying to do this at Brown University, okay? Okay, but let me make this observation that these are rough numbers. I can't prove my numbers, but I'm into this. I think there's an equal number of students at Brown University who would be pissed that we're doing what we're doing, as at North Carolina. As a percentage, it's higher at Brown than it is at North Carolina. There's plenty of anger at North Carolina, plenty. But there's 20,000 students, so the 400 students that don't like us, they still are making a ton of noise outside the building. You know, it's still a thing. So I just want to be clear. While North Carolina is a little bit different, it still has a very loud voice that is difficult, I think, to deal with. And in particular, as you know, generally we know, it's the people who make the most noise make the most noise. Like, that's just the way it goes. I do think that there is we live in a very strange time, and I don't know how to qualitatively describe it, but there's a lot going on, you know. And as many of you, like, I'll say we need a diversity of opinion, and somebody hears diversity, and that's bad, right? Because that's DE&I, right? I know this is crazy, but this is sort of the world that we're dealing with. Okay, all that aside, it's my observation that the notion of dialogue mattering is on the move. Like, it is moving in a direction where even the people who are most opposed to these different things, I think just a kernel of this exists in such a way that I do think the door is cracking open a little bit. I hope some of you guys feel some of this optimism as well. But I can't answer that perfectly, but I would love to try, because I think it's important to answer that question, and I don't think any of us will know until we try. I do believe this. I do believe most of the college presidents who you would think would be afraid to do this feel like they need to do this now. And I think we could be in a position to say, hey guys, it's time to try. Can you let us try?
Yeah, my perception was that North Carolina was going to be a much easier place to do it than other places. I'm a New Yorker. You know, the day I got to campus, I took a photo of the Daily Tar Heel campus paper, because their lead story was that Students for Justice in Palestine called for Hillel being banned from campus because it was like the Ku Klux Klan. And I sent it to Tom, and I was like, what the, what? And so I thought there wouldn't be extremists. There'd be like polite Southerners. And it was kind of extreme. So I think this can work in more extreme settings, because this was more extreme than I had imagined. I would love to, I don't know if we have time now, I'm very curious what the naive part is that you mentioned, because I'm curious what was naive.
Well, forest for the trees, right? What you're trying to do is alongside of student groups that are receiving money from other places, that have adults help them set up on campus, that have major street gatherings and adults involved in it. So, and I know what you're trying to do is have these people think individually of the ideologies in both these places, right? That's essentially what you're trying to do, have them come to their ideas by themselves, right? Because if other people from these groups
Totally.
SJP or every variation of those group names, and they have very specific goals going against your goal, and you have to take that into consideration, right? Because they
Totally.
are trying to co-opt other movements in Canada, indigenous groups, and co-opt
100%.
democracy.
Yeah.
You know,
I got it.
You're in a much bigger problem than I'm just.
Yes. So let me just.
We don't know how big this problem is.
Maybe not, but let me just say very quickly, and then we'll go. I had the privilege after I finished college, my first job, I went to work for Lech Wałęsa when he became the first freely elected president of Poland. And he was up against big odds, like the Soviet Union. And what it did for me was it gave me this indelible faith in people. And it may be a naive faith in people, but I also worked on the Obama campaign in 2008. He was up against like very serious odds, right? Like the Muslim socialist was going to become president of the United States. It was crazy. And what I've come to believe is that you invest in these pockets of people, and you unleash them, and then they go out and do huge things. And even against the most vicious, strategic, like a lot of what Tom and I talk about is that there's been a 30-year campaign, right, to demonize Israel and to demonize Zionists. That's my view. And that there's some people who want to run a 30-year campaign to rehabilitate Israel and Zionists and demonize the other team. And I think they'll lose. Like, I think what we have to do is lift up the bridge builders, right, and unleash them to say, I'm not playing that game. Because my bias is, in the light of day, I think Israel will do fine, right, if it's given exposure, right? If it's given a chance to look at the history and the story, I feel good about it. And so I think it may be naive, but it falls back to my life experience of investing in everyday people to unleash them to make history, and that's the best antidote to all the forces of meanness in this society.
Go ahead, yeah. Yeah. We just to be fair, we talk about this all the time. I mean, we always say we got to go northeast and do the liberals, and we got to do that, and we know
so
that's true. Go ahead.
I'm actually following up on what you were saying because I'm trying to do something similar on my campus, and I've got groups that have controversial conversations outside of class. Most people would say I'm a pretty gutsy kind of person. I don't go as far as you do. I mean, you're doing some really amazing stuff where it seems like you're going to the most raw deep emotions, and it doesn't matter if things go south. In fact, it might be good, and if you fail, you fail. I try to just ignore all the bad stuff that happened, and already people are angry at me just for the fact that I'm having these conversations. So I think here's the thing. Just before I came here, I was at a session about campus investigations, where just anybody who doesn't like what you're doing can start this frivolous investigation, and you're in a lot of trouble. I think maybe the perspective of somebody who's coming in and doing this kind of thing, no one's going to start a campus investigation about you when you come in to do it, because you're not a permanent fixture. But the people who are on campus, those of us who are on campus permanently, always have that hanging over our shoulders. So I wonder, what advice do you have, or do you have any thoughts about how we could handle it without just, opening up the possibility of our careers being destroyed?
Yeah, I think you're completely right that we had the benefit and we played on it, right? Like we don't work here. We don't need to come down here every Monday. And in some of our other bridging work, we've had students say, Simon, if you were actually a real professor, you would have gotten fired for saying that, right? So I get that the stakes are different and higher for you. I think what Jonathan Haidt said to me last night was that, we showed a clip with him in it where he said that he couldn't trust his students. And so he said from 2016 to 2022, he didn't trust his students, and so he held back. And but last night he said to me, he's like, I want you to set the record straight that then in 2022, he made a decision that he didn't want to live that way anymore, and that he was going to take the risk. And if he got written up again and brought before the EEO investigation and the dean, and it would have to happen because he didn't want to live in the non-trusting. And so I think, maybe not that helpful. The summary is harder for you than for us, and I think you got to do it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Taking your advice of just failing, because I don't know how to word this question, but so just a little background. So I've actually perhaps I do participate in John Rose and stuff, and I've taught courses on this and I've taught with this issue, and so I'm kind of struggling
Yeah.
wrong or that different sides have a point. So like when I taught this, I was more likely to talk about, when I taught this, I would be more likely to introduce, you know, provocative things about like we did. We left off from Heterodox, where she said like some cultures are superior to other cultures, right? And that was like one way that we dealt with like foreign conflicts and issues like that. The students really did want to talk about 1948 and 1967 and 1973. I made the decision not to do that because I feel like it was like this endless cycle of like tallying up who's got the best case to make, as if that's how we decide which civilizations or which cultures we think should win the day in a conflict-form world, sort of like who we are. Sorry, I think I'm totally failing at this.
No, I think you're doing, yeah.
You have to have thought of this and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so.
That somehow gets you to what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I actually heard you say a couple of different things that I want to react to.
I mean, you must have like some inner motivation, which maybe you don't even want to say to a room full of people are being recorded, of where you want this to end up.
Yeah,
That's
so,
true, right?
yeah, for sure. So a couple of things. If I followed what you were saying, I think for me, and I think for Tom, I think the way we approached it is that the students need to go on their own journey of first, it's legitimate to explore two sides, right? Because they sort of were first trained that there's only one side you should listen to. So it's worth exploring two sides. Then they start to explore it, and they're like, oh, it's actually not two sides. There's like 2,000 sides. That's confusing. And then they start to dig into the facts. They want to figure out, well, so how many people were expelled in 48, and then how many people were expelled in 48 to 67 from Arab lands, or Jews from Arab lands, right? And then they start to meet people. Let me finish. Then they start to meet people who are involved in the conflict. And those people will say to them, I can get up here and tell you the story about why I'm right? But part of our conflict is that we're unwilling at the negotiating table to say, I see the truth in your story too, right? We just berate them with facts, proving that our team is right. And that's why we can't make peace here, because we don't even accept that their facts could be true enough for them. So we had to, I think, let students go on that journey. We had them read Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Message, where he has a chapter on Palestine. And we had them talk about Dr. King and what would King have thought. And late in the class, late in the semester, I had a whole class. We had a whole class set aside to talk about civil rights and the racial justice framework and how valuable that is for understanding the conflict. And right off the bat, one of our students says, I think they're trying to weaponize an American prophet because if King's on your team, you can't lose. So I don't think it's really worth talking about. And I thought, I kind of wrap it up right there. Like, you've decided that you don't want to play games about this. It's not helpful to apply Martin Luther King to this conflict. And so, having said all that, our last class, they had 18 minutes to move into 4 small groups to tackle these questions. Is Israel a colonial project who is indigenous to the land? Israel the only democracy in the region? Is it an apartheid state? Are Palestinians a people? Are they just Arabs? Are Jews a religion, a people, a race, a tribe, or an ethnicity? And who is the aggressor and who's on defense? If you had asked these questions, even like let these words come out of your mouth in class 1, right? People would have just walked out of the room. Like, I'm not talking about any of that. They had 18 minutes. And each group came out with not just a, it's hard to decide, right? But they came out with a point of view on every single one. And beautifully said, like, our group thinks it's not a colonial project. We think Jews are indigenous to the land. Having said that, there are some people in our group who see it differently, and let me explain how they see it. And I thought, like, that's all we can hope for, is that they can come up with a strong point of view of what they've come to believe, and that they could respect that other people might see it differently, even if their facts aren't as good as their facts. So.
Let me interrupt.
But I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think that the question, for me, when I'm teaching this, like even affirming the idea that indigenous somehow qualifies something to be right or correct or the decision-making rule, just to even affirm that is to somewhat give up a huge part of the conversation to, I think, a very old way of thinking. And, you know, this idea even that, you know, that, so look, I mean, I'm not,
All I would say is I don't think the point is indigeneity the basis for decision making. The point is you walk out of our classroom and people are screaming that they should go back home or they're not really a people, and you have to have a way to deal with it if you're going to engage seriously in the world. And so you can then dismiss it as not relevant, like you can dismiss that civil rights framework isn't relevant for understanding the East, but you should at least think about it because you want to be a serious person who's tackling the issues of the day. So.
We're over time, and I want other people to. We'll stay and take a few more questions. Before we go, I do want to say I've heard a lot of different things today that we would love to work with people to solve. Like, we know we don't have a silver bullet, and we know it's not even the middle of the first inning. You know, we know we're at the beginning. And some of these challenges that you guys are bringing up, we'd love to be helpful, and we'd love to learn from these kinds of opportunities. So know that, and I mean sincerely, like, write us, do whatever you can, and we're happy to share our information. We're happy to share films, please know that. And frankly, from my point of view, and I imagine you're gonna end up agreeing to a certain extent, like whatever the hardest problem is in this room, like that's what we'd love to do next. You know, like let's try that really hard thing and see where we can get. And then I wanna be, if people wanna go, please, because we're over time,